I rise today to begin to filibuster John Brennan's nomination for the CIA.
You can call what I'm doing today whatever you want. You can call it a filibuster. You can call it a very long speech.
Madam President, I rise today in opposition to Obamacare.
Yes, Mr. President, I intend to speak for an extended period of time on the bill.
In politics, there is nothing more simple yet fascinating than the filibuster. You want to delay something you disagree with, or even outright prevent it, all you have to do is stand and talk. Filibusters come in many forms all over the world, but generally, a filibuster boils down to the fact that a final decision or vote cannot happen until debate is concluded, and that debate is prolonged for as long as possible. When it comes to the United States, although party leaders in the House of Representatives are allowed to speak with no time limit, the Senate is known for being the source of many famous filibusters. In the U.S. Senate, senators are allowed to speak for as long as they want, and they are also not limited in what they can talk about. Oftentimes, a filibuster is a test of endurance because it requires you to remain standing without any support, and unless you're taking questions, you must keep talking. Sometimes a group of senators can agree to give back-to-back speeches in a sort of collective filibuster in an attempt to reduce the pressure on each individual senator. But people are usually more interested in solo filibusters, when one senator alone makes the effort to hold the floor and prolong the debate. Solo filibusters are always the most interesting because they depend entirely on the stamina or willingness of that specific senator. There are various reasons for why they end. Sometimes they end because eventually the senator has to use the bathroom.
And I would go for another 12 hours to try to break Strom Thurmond's record, but I've discovered that there are some limits to filibustering, and I'm going to have to go take care of one of those in a few minutes here.
Sometimes they end at the senator's own discretion,
which better reflects the needs of the middle class and working families of our country, and to me, most importantly, the children of our country. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Sometimes they end because of repeated violations of the rules.
Senator Campbell, your point of order is well taken and is sustained.
And sometimes they end because you weren't even delaying anything and the vote was going to happen anyway.
And together in opposed cloture, and I would ask for my friends on the Democratic aisle to listen to
the hour of noon having arrived. Pursuant to the order of the Senate will be in order.
These limitations can be overcome if you make the right preparations, both physical and mental. Preparations such as having attachments that allow you to relieve yourself discreetly and bringing reading material in order to help pass the time are what allowed South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond to speak for 24 hours and 18 minutes, the longest filibuster in the history of the U.S. Senate, a record which stands to this day. But the true record for the longest filibuster in any legislature doesn't come from Washington, D.C. In Austin, in the Texas Senate, the filibuster we're going to be analyzing doesn't just put Strom Thurmond's record to shame. It's in a completely different world. Before we dive into the 43-hour filibuster, we must first understand the issues that were going on at the time, and also get acquainted with the individuals involved. In 1973, during the 63rd session, the Texas legislature passed House Bill 6, and it was signed into law by Governor Dolph Briscoe. This law, known as the Texas Open Records Act, made state records of a government agency more accessible to the public, and organizations or individuals could request any records that they were interested in, with some obvious exceptions. 8 days after the Open Records Act went into effect, a corporation of 282 member companies known as the Industrial Foundation of the South made a request to obtain records from the Texas Industrial Accident Board of every workman's compensation claim filed with them, including the name, social security number, nature of injury, and other relevant details of basically every industrial worker who had an accident on the job and who filed for workman's compensation. The Industrial Accident Board was reluctant to provide the information, and they asked Texas Attorney General John Hill for his opinion. He declared that under the Open Records Act, those records were in fact public information. Despite this, the Industrial Accident Board refused to disclose the information requested, so in response, the Industrial Foundation of the South filed a lawsuit against the Industrial Accident Board. The District Court of Travis County sided with the Foundation, ruling that the records were in fact public information, with the exception of claims involving injuries to specific regions of the body. The Industrial Accident Board was ordered by the District Court to supply the records, but the board still refused, and they chose to appeal the ruling, so the case was taken to the Texas Third Court of Appeals. The appeals court agreed to hear the case, mainly due to the fact that the Industrial Accident Board wasn't provided the resources to properly make their defense. Ultimately, though, the Court of Appeals sided with the Foundation, ruling that the records were in fact public information, but also that some of the records would have to remain confidential if they dealt with embarrassing or objectionable information. Still unsatisfied, the Industrial Accident Board refused. So finally, in 1976, the Supreme Court of Texas agreed to hear the case, and they reaffirmed the ruling of the appeals court. As the laws of Texas currently stood, the records requested by the Foundation were considered public information and had to be disclosed. So what if we change the law? Enter Senate Bill 1275. Introduced by the Senate in 1977 by the 65th Texas Legislature, Senate Bill 1275 would make records of workmen's compensation claims confidential and inaccessible to anyone requesting them. Now, Senate Bill 1275 was first read on April 21st, and by the beginning of May, it seemed like the Senate was just about ready to vote on it. The speed at which this bill was flying through the Senate was of particular concern to one senator who will go on to filibuster this bill for 43 hours, and who will act as the protagonist of this story. Let's talk about Bill Meier. Before entering politics, Bill Meier was an attorney living in Euless, a small city located in Tarrant County and right in the middle of the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area. After working in Fort Worth as a business lawyer for a few years, Meier decided in 1972 that he should run in that year's election for the 10th Senate District, which occupied the northern half of Tarrant County. His campaign had quite a few advantages. Being in his early 30s, he was a young political newcomer at a time where people wanted to see some new faces in the Texas Senate. He also ran on an anti-taxation position at a time when Texas had just passed the largest tax bill in its history at the time. Meier won the election, replacing Don Kennard, who had served in the Senate since 1963, and who had also served in the Texas House of Representatives for 10 years before that. Meier's first ever public office saw him serving in the 63rd Texas Legislature. If you'll remember, that's the same session in which the Texas Open Records Act was passed. Bill Meier was one of the bill's strongest supporters in the Senate. Among other laws that were signed by Governor Briscoe, the Open Records Act was one of the pieces of legislation which Meier heavily pushed for in his first term. This is why, 2 sessions later in 1977, when the 65th Texas Legislature was considering Senate Bill 1275, Meier became deeply concerned. He viewed the bill as a direct attack on the Open Records Act, and the short amount of time between the bill being introduced and being debated also didn't help. He also realized that most of the other senators also supported the bill, and if a vote were to take place, there was no doubt that Senate Bill 1275 was going to pass. So Meier, now 36 years old, began making preparations to delay the vote for as long as possible. He knew that filibustering the bill wouldn't change the outcome of the vote in the Senate, but he hoped that by talking at length about the bill, he would bring attention to the issue and possibly even affect the outcome of the vote in the House. Whatever his goals were, Meier was prepared to talk to his absolute limit. A key difference between filibusters in the United States Senate and filibusters in the Texas Senate is germaneness. Filibusters by United States senators do not have to remain on topic, they just have to talk. This is what allowed Ted Cruz to read from Green Eggs and Ham during his 21-hour filibuster in 2013.
I would not like them here or there. I would not like them anywhere. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them. Sam, I am.
But in the Texas Senate, a senator who is filibustering must only talk about things that are germane, or relevant to the topic. Otherwise, you are penalized with a point of order. And if 3 points of order are sustained against you, you must yield the floor. And that goes for any violation of the rules. If you try to lean on your desk, you talk about something unrelated, that's a point of order. So 3 strikes, and you're out. Bill Meier began researching legal cases related to the right to privacy, since that was considered relevant to Senate Bill 1275. By researching these cases, he would gather enough reading material to be able to speak for a long time, while also ensuring that he would remain on topic. By the time his filibuster began, he was prepared to read from 276 legal briefs. As for the other limitation of a filibuster, Meier planned on attaching what journalists refer to as a quote-unquote astronaut bag to the inside of his pants in order to relieve himself while still standing at his desk. On the morning of May 2nd, 1977, Meier was absent from the Senate because his flight to Austin had been held up by heavy cloud cover. But he finally arrived on the Senate floor by noon, after which a recess was called until 3 o'clock. During this recess, Meier had time to set up his resources to filibuster, including his astronaut bag, as well as a very large stack of law books retrieved from the legislature's library, which he was going to read from. The Senate reconvened at 3 p.m., and when the time came to consider Senate Bill 1275, Bill Meier sprang into action. At 3:20 p.m., Meier began his filibuster. He'd started by submitting an amendment to the bill, which would allow details of active workmen's compensation claims to be disclosed to all parties involved. It also laid out some other details of the claims which would remain open to anyone who requested it. Basically, the amendment would help reduce the amount of information that would become confidential if Senate Bill 1275 was passed. Meier began by criticizing the Industrial Accident Board's repeated efforts to prevent their records from being disclosed, and he summarizes the events and details of the lawsuit filed against them by the Industrial Foundation of the South.
As a matter of fact, what has happened in 1973 was the legislature passed a bill that says the records of state government are open. A request was filed with this Industrial Accident Board to look at records concerning workmen's compensation claims. The board, under the Act, refused to grant that request and instead requested an Attorney General's opinion. Now, this agency has been told by the legislature in '73, by the district court, by the Attorney General of the state of Texas, who's the man that makes the rulings on the open records law, by a district court in Austin, by the Supreme Court of Texas, and by the United States Supreme Court that these records are open. And they still have the audacity to come over here to this legislature and say to this legislature, in spite of all of this, close them up.
As a major supporter of the Open Records Act, Meier was pretty upset. When Senate Bill 1275 was introduced, he viewed it as the Industrial Accident Board trying to use the legislature to change the law after having been rejected by every level of the legal system. After this, Meier begins to yield for questions from other senators, including one of the sponsors of Senate Bill 1275, the man who will act as the antagonist in our story. Representing the 30th Senate District is the senator from Wichita Falls in Wichita County, Ray Farabee. Senate rules require that at least one sponsor of a bill be present as long as it's being debated. In this case, Senator Farabee has taken it upon himself to remain on the floor for as long as Senator Meier filibusters the bill. He'll remain at his desk for pretty much the entire filibuster, and only really spoke up to call points of order on other senators. But right now, he's focused on seriously debating Meier. And I'll give you a demonstration here of some of the points Farabee and other supporters of the bill bring up.
Well, the fact is that Judge Doherty, at the very beginning of his opinion, made this statement, and I'll quote it and ask you if it isn't correct. We hold that the information requested, with some exceptions to be noted, is public information as defined in the Open Records Act.
That's right.
And he didn't just say one exception involving genitalia or matters of that nature, but there are other exceptions discussed in that opinion, isn't
Yes,
that
sir,
correct?
there are exceptions, but there are not a blanket, there's not anything in that opinion, Senator, that affords the blanket authority to blatantly close the records of one agency as you propose in your bill. And your bill is one of nothing but adhering to the secrecy doctrine in government that I think all of us are sick and tired of and ready to get on to something else.
Now, Senator, as a matter of fact, those records have been open in the past, and they are open to people who have claims or to employers who have claims being made for work for an injury that occurred on the job.
Senator, now let's don't pull that on the Senate. You know good and well those records are not open to the people most vitally in interest, and that's the one paying the bill.
As a matter of fact, the only persons they aren't open to are the people who would use these records for blacklisting, such as the Industrial Foundation of the
Negatory,
South.
Senator, that's not right, and you know it's not right.
As a matter of fact, doesn't the Industrial Foundation of the South sell these records at the rate of $7 per name?
To the employers, I'm not sure what the fees are, don't have any interest in it.
Now, Senator Meier,
if your argument on commercialism, if you think that you ought to not have any public record that ever ought to be sold for a profit, then I suggest that you get a bill up to close down every county clerk's office in the state of Texas.
I want to highlight two things mentioned in this section. First, Farabee brings up the issue of exceptions. So, later on, Meier discusses legal cases related to the right to privacy and how certain zones of privacy were created over time which create exceptions to laws like the Open Records Act, which make state records open to the public. But Meier also accuses the bill of going beyond exceptions and simply having a blanket effect on a larger amount of records. The other issue, which I think was probably the biggest concern, was that of blacklisting. Let's say an industrial worker was injured on the job and they file for workman's compensation. Could the Industrial Foundation of the South then access that information and refuse to hire that worker in the future in order to avoid dealing with another claim? Well, according to Meier, there were already laws in place that were meant to protect workers against such blacklisting. In any case, there were multiple reasons that most of the Senate was willing to pass the bill. The last thing Farabee asked of Meier was the names of the companies that were a part of the Industrial Foundation of the South. Supposedly someone was going to provide them, but they never did.
I'll suggest to you that I'll read you the names of everybody that's a member. I don't have it today, but I can get it, and when I do get it, I'm going to read it to you. You know what you're going to find, Senator? You're going to find the people that are members of that group are almost the bulk, the very lifeblood of the economy in this state. They are the employers that are most responsible for the jobs of most people in the state of Texas.
well, whoever they may be, we'll appreciate your making that available.
I'll read it to you, Senator. I'll make you that promise.
Thank you.
After Farabee ends his questioning, Meier is questioned further by Senator Carl Parker from Port Arthur in Jefferson County. He asks a few questions about whether Meier is accusing other senators of selling out to business interests by supporting the bill, which Meier denies. And they also briefly debate the issue of employers potentially blacklisting workers with a claim. After this round of questioning from Parker, Farabee again rises to question Meier about exceptions. Farabee ends his questioning, and Meier is left to his own devices. Over the next 40 or so minutes, Meier reads from his law books, and he does so mostly uninterrupted. During this time, you can hear the difference between his strong debate voice and his slightly calmer reading voice.
See Texas Revised Civil Statutes annotated 695J-I, Section 10, and Article 5547-12A, Supplement 1975-76, and Article 45C, Section 4, Supplement 1974. It's clear that the records covered by these statutes fall within Section 3A1's exception for records made confidential by statute.
Eventually, some more questioning and other parliamentary activity goes on that gives Meier some relief. Senator Chet Brooks from Pasadena in Harris County motions for the Senate Human Resources Committee to meet off the floor while Meier continues his filibuster. This is a common thing during filibusters in the Texas legislature. Committees meet outside the chamber, so even though Meier is blocking a vote on the bill, he's not freezing the Senate altogether. Meier also sometimes yields for a House message, which is a brief report of the activities recently completed by the Texas House of Representatives. Next, Senator Tom Creighton from Mineral Wells in Palo Pinto County asks Meier how long he's going to go for with the amount of reading material he has. And Meier assures him he'll be fine.
Senator, where are you in your dissertation now?
Let's see, I'm on the first case. Senator, I've got today I've got about 40 more to read, and I think that might get us through tonight. And then I've got a couple more briefs I need to read tomorrow and a few other cases.
Do you have enough material there to carry you into 12 o'clock tomorrow night?
Yes, sir.
Because you know Wednesday's House Bill Day, and couldn't further debate or consider this bill beyond that.
I have adequate material, Senator, and I think I have adequate staff.
Well, could I take a little nap without worry about you quitting?
You go right ahead and take a nap, Senator. Do what anything else you feel like doing.
Alright, so in that clip, you might have noticed that Creighton only asks Meier if he could filibuster until the end of Tuesday, because after that, it would be House Bill Day. Now right now, we're still well over 30 hours away from Wednesday, so Meier probably wasn't really thinking about that. And so I'm gonna hold off on explaining exactly what it means, but for now just know that there is a potential limit to Meier's filibuster, and it's a bridge that we're gonna have to cross later on down the line. A few minutes after this, Meier again yields to allow the Senate to pass House Bill 1319, and after that, when another senator, who I could not identify, asks about the relevance of the case Meier is reading from, it results in a pretty goofy exchange.
No, we got to talking about the rights of privacy here in this opinion I'm trying to get the Senate to consider, Senator. And one of the things they're talking about is maybe being a little private was the art of procreation.
The who?
That's one of the words that the Supreme Court put in here, and I'm not real sure.
Again?
Well, it deals with procreation, contraception, family relationships, or child rearing, and I think they probably come about in that order.
Procreation?
Yes.
What does that mean, Senator?
Well, I'd say that maybe was creating if you're a professional.
That's Hey, does contraception preclude procreation?
I would think that's probably a pretty fair guess in the normal course of events, Senator.
Once that was over, Meier was once again on his own. He occasionally took questions from other senators, but he made plenty of progress in his reading.
The individual's right to maintain some degree of privacy in affairs of his personal life must not be forgotten in the effort to maintain the openness of governmental activities. Even in the complex and closely regulated bureaucracy of today's society, the individual's right of privacy and the people's right to be informed may exist, if not in harmony, at least without irreconcilable conflict.
This doesn't last forever though, as Senator John Traeger from Seguin in Guadalupe County presents a very long list of questions for Meier about the effects of Senate Bill 1275. They go over things like blacklisting, how much of a difference Meier's amendment would make, and the speed at which the bill is being processed.
And therefore, I think that the amendment I've laid out is highly relevant to all this material that I've got for the Senate to digest, and that's why I'm discussing that amendment.
Will improve the bill, will it not?
Well, it'd improve it a little bit, but it'd still be it would still smell a little. Sir.
So, Senator, if you were asked a question, will this bill cut down on employers' costs? What would your answer be?
No.
Will this bill deliver more money to employees?
It will not help the employees at all.
Will this bill help somebody else?
Apparently it's going to help somebody, but I don't think it's going to be the employer or the employee.
Once Traeger finishes his line of questioning, Senator Creighton would later rise to ask Meier some more questions. But this time, he is determined to give Meier a break from having to speak at all.
Senator Meier, would you give me a short one-sentence answer to my next question?
I'll try.
What does the following mean? A bill to be entitled an act relating to workers' compensation regulations and benefits, amending Section 12C, Article 8306, revised civil statutes of Texas.
Over the course of the next 15 minutes, Creighton recites the full text of Senate Bill 1275. This is a common tactic used by senators who support the one doing the filibuster. Of course, you have to frame it in the form of a question, and your discussion has to be germane to the topic being considered. So what better solution than to read the whole bill and ask what it means? It's a completely on-topic question that also takes a really long time to ask. Creighton ends his questions, and Meier reads some more, and then he yields to yet another senator for questions, the senator who is, in my opinion, the closest ally of Bill Meier throughout this whole ordeal. It's Walter Mengden from Houston in Harris County. From what I've heard in these tapes, it seems like Senator Mengden spends the most amount of time asking Senator Meier questions, mainly because he would usually ask questions by prefacing them with extensive reading from legal briefs. And he speaks painfully slow.
On page 17 and page 19, Cockman v. Keensburg, Board of Education, 124 New Jersey, 203, 305 Atlantic 2nd, 807, and 1973, on page 29 and page 33.
This strategy wasn't completely flawless, however. Senator Farabee, who has been carefully observing everything that's been happening, raises a point of order against Mengden.
On page
Mr. President,
21,
I raise a point of order.
American-
These are remarks and not the nature of a question.
well, it will be a question if Mr. President.
It might have been difficult to understand what the chair was saying there, but the chair sustains the point of order, and Mengden continues his questioning, perhaps with a bit more caution. And when I say Mengden is a close ally of Meier, I really do mean it. This line of questioning literally goes on for hours. With how much relief Meier is getting, his speaking voice almost has a full recovery. Meier starts speaking so freely, in fact, that he even trips over his own words at one point.
It's merely a rule that has the force and effect of law, and I think that they're talking about agencies like the Texas Alcoholic and Industrial Board, and perhaps maybe, excuse me, I'm talking a little bit too much. Pardon me, Senator. The Texas Alcoholic Beverages Commission, and perhaps even the Railroad Commission that has certain rule-making authority that can have the force and effect of law.
Finally, Mengden concludes his questioning sometime past 10 o'clock at night, and although he was offered help, Meier declines it. And so Meier will stand alone throughout the night, reading from his law books. Well, he won't be completely alone. Senator Farabee will be right behind him, and there must always be someone at the dais to act as the chair in order to moderate whatever debate could potentially arise. As time passed, Meier went back to speaking in a moderate tone of voice to conserve his energy.
That the legislature has delegated to the Railroad Commission the power not only to enforce its statutory mandates for the conservation of oil and gas, but also the power to make rules and orders necessary to carry into effective operation the legislative purpose.
Additionally, it's around the end of Monday when we can clearly hear Meier begin to consume food while continuing to speak.
He is trying to bootstrap the rule and regulation of the Industrial Accident Board into the same kind of situation.
Meier occasionally eats food throughout the night and for the rest of the filibuster. Meier himself stated in a 2013 interview, "I had some light things like some lemon slices, Every now and then I would try to get a little bitty piece of Hershey bar to stick into my mouth and keep talking. That's about all I had to eat. He would also sometimes suck on hard candy while speaking. But you might be thinking, don't the rules prohibit eating and drinking? So, officially, senators both in Washington, D.C. and in Austin are not allowed to eat in the Senate chamber. Here, in the rules of the Senate of the 65th Texas Legislature, it plainly says, no employee, senator, representative, or other person shall be allowed to eat or drink in the Senate chamber proper at any time. In practice, this rule was much more relaxed, and sometimes the rules on eating and drinking are not as strict for senators who engage in a filibuster. If you ask me, it's pretty subjective. But with that, the clock strikes midnight, and we conclude the events of Monday, May 2nd, 1977. In the early hours of Tuesday, May 3rd, Meier is on the Senate floor, standing at his desk and reading from a giant stack of law books, while Farabee is half asleep, and the chair awaits any possible events. The sergeant-at-arms is likely also present, guarding the chamber. Suddenly, sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., Meier is interrupted by his own lungs.
That is, to those having some rational connection with or bearing upon, or which might be affected. Excuse me, Mr. President, members.
It's really quite shocking. Seriously though, Meier has done a good job at staying awake and has maintained a fairly healthy tone of voice. This is of course considering that it's now approaching roughly 5:30 a.m., so the filibuster has begun to take its toll on him. To demonstrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to do a comparison between myself and Senator Meier. First, I will time myself reading this paragraph of the case opinion on Swanson v. American Manufacturing Company. The following facts are undisputed. Swanson filed his application for employment with AMCOT on September 20th, 1972, and was employed by AMCOT from September 21st, 1972 to May 18th, 1973. Swanson was injured on March 23, 1973. He received medical treatment at the expense of AMCOT, was off work several days, and returned for full-time work on April 30, 1973, and worked full-time until May 18, 1973, at which time he was discharged. There is some confusion in the record as to whether they returned for full-time work on April 23rd or April 30th. However, we believe the latter date to be more accurate because of a reference to his return to work about the 1st of May. Now, let's hear Meier reading the same paragraph and see how long it takes for him to get through it.
The following facts being undisputed, Swanson filed his application for employment with AMCOT on September 20th, 1972. He further stated that he was employed by AMCOT from September 21st, 1972 to May the 18th of 1973, and that Swanson was injured on May 23rd, 1973. He received medical treatment at the expense of AMCOT and was off work for several days and returned for full-time work on April 30th, 1973. He then worked for full-time with the until May 18, 1973, at which time he was discharged, and there's some confusion in the record as to whether he returned for full-time work on April 23rd or on April 3rd. However, there is no argument about the fact that the latter date was the more accurate because of a reference to his return to work about the 1st of May.
One could say that I'm cherry-picking this example, and there's also the fact that Meier has no reason to read any faster than he needs to. I mean, slow speech is kind of starting to become a theme here. But it goes without saying that he's not as energetic as he was 14 hours ago. Anyway, an hour and a half later, some of the early birds of the Senate have returned to the chamber.
Good morning.
Looking fresh.
How are you?
Yep. Did you get all right last night?
I sure did. Thank you. My voice is still holding out. And a few more books.
I assume he's had a good night's sleep. And Meier, well, he had to get through the night the long way. But it's a good thing that the senators have arrived again, because Meier is in need of some relief by the time the chamber begins to fill up again, another hour later. And what better option is there than Senator Mangden for another extensive round of questioning?
He says I'm not bringing the records. Mr. President, I yield for a question if it doesn't take me off the floor.
Gentlemen, yield.
Is it all right for me to yield and not take me off the floor, Mr.
It will
President?
not remove you from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator, I just got into my office this morning, and I have a letter that I received from a constituent of mine asking me a question which I would like to ask you so I'll know how to answer this letter.
This time, instead of reading from legal briefs, Mangden is reading from letters sent to him by his constituents. He will also go on to read sections of Meier's amendment and ask questions about every little detail. Unfortunately for Senator Mangden, Farabee is wide awake.
They were worried that the plaintiff's lawyers would also get a list of these claims, and they would turn these...
President, point of order. Remarks are being made that are not in the nature of an inquiry, and he would only have a right to make an inquiry and not to make a statement.
No, Mr.
Would the senator ask his question?
Oh,
Understandable
yes,
for
this
Senator
is really a
Wichita can
question
understand the
here
question.
because it's who's going to get the list of these names and what's going to be done with the list of these names. And I think that it's going to solve the question of some of these, or the problems of some of these answers, if the senator here has an answer, and if in fact it does answer this question.
Alright, false alarm. But during this line of questioning, Meier and Mangden actually end up doing something productive when they notice some small gaps in the information that would be affected by Meier's amendment.
Name of the attorney.
Yes, that's also there, Senator.
Nature of the injury.
Yes, that's covered in the amendment too.
Date of the injury.
Yes, I think that's covered too. Let me be sure now. Date and location of the claimant's name, social security number, the employer's address, the insurance carrier, the date and location of the board's action, the name of the attorney. No, it doesn't have that.
All right, let me make a note of that.
You might want to send an amendment up to do that, Senator. Senator, does it take you more than a couple of days to get amendments drawn?
Oh, sir.
I think you got plenty of time.
Well, thank you, Senator. I will get right to work.
Mangden then leaves the Senate chamber to go work on his amendment to Meier's amendment. Keep in mind, Meier's amendment is the current pending business, so if you really want to get technical about it, Meier is kind of filibustering his own amendment, but ultimately it's still delaying the bill because in order to move on, the Senate must first vote on the amendment before doing anything else. Anyway, Meier reads from his law books for a little while in the absence of an ally, but later Senator Traeger comes back and both him and Meier exchange some harsh words about Senate Bill 1275.
In fact, I think it is, since you and I have come to the Senate, that this is the first thing that I felt as strongly about as I feel about, that I was willing to go through the arduous task of trying to call attention to this bill, to my fellow colleagues in the Senate, and try to emphasize that I really believe that this amendment ought to be adopted to this bill if we're going to pass it at all. This is nothing more than a how-to-do-it book to close up the records that have been opened as a consequence of the Open Records Act that we passed in 1973. Our people here have been least affected by the impact of inflation and by least affected by the problem of lost jobs. And here we are coming around with a bill that takes a step backward and closes up the records of one of the most specialized agencies of state government, which has fought continuously for 2.5 years to maintain a veil of secrecy into its internal affairs.
It's roughly around noon, or maybe a little past noon, when Traeger's questioning becomes a bit more heated. We just heard from Meier the things that are making him the most upset, but it's not so easy to go around yelling at the top of your lungs when you're running on 0 hours of sleep and you've been filibustering for 20 hours. But speaking of yelling at the top of your lungs, Traeger's mood has changed quite a bit since yesterday, and he's got his own way of expressing just how much he hates Senate Bill 1275.
It should be done as the people of this state, as the legislature of this state, as a great reform movement.
That's exactly right, Senator.
That we shall have open record.
If there's not any question,
the day of the closed closet proceedings is over.
Mrs.
That the hidden record is no longer there.
I'm really just astounded that we can take a 180 degrees turn and move in the other direction in today's world.
I'm astounded, aren't you?
I really am astounded.
I'm appalled, aren't you?
I certainly am. That's what I'm trying
upset,
to. I hope we can get everybody convinced of that, Senator. I really am curious, Senator. I'm just now got my curiosity up. I really can't imagine. I cannot understand what in the world can be so secretive over there.
I can't imagine either, sir.
That these records have been caught all this time.
Outraged by it. And I know you are too. You wouldn't be making the effort you're making. Is that right, Senator?
I am outraged, Senator, but I'm tired.
Senator, I'm amazed that you can maintain your decorum, that you can curtail your emotions, that you can even-handedly.
Senator, you should have seen me at 3 o'clock last night.
At 3 in the morning, continue to pursue a course of action that you feel is best for Texas and all Texans. Is that right, Senator?
You're exactly right, Senator.
Traeger quickly tones down after this, and they move on to a calmer discussion about the amendment. And, God, I don't want to drag this on any longer than I need to, but this whole questioning between Meier and Traeger is just really weird.
It's ready, mate.
Everything you do is it not relegate around that Social Security number.
It's either that or your driver's license number.
Senator, don't forget your name, but don't forget your Social Security number. Is that right, Senator?
I'll know mine, Senator. 46054.
Whoa, Senator Meier, I know you're in favor of open records, but let's not be so reckless. Yeah. Then there's this other part where Meier is again criticizing the speed at which the bill is being considered, and he calls it a meteorite bill.
But I do want to tell you that my remembrance of how all this came about is that this bill is one of the speeding meteorites of this legislative session. That bill has got a meteorite pace on it. It's like nothing you've seen in this whole session, Senator.
A meteorite is awful fast.
That bill is faster than a meteorite.
Like Halley's Comet?
So I want you to know it didn't even have a tail that went by so fast.
No tail on the back.
I don't even have no tail on this one. Because, Senator, that bill, I think that what you'll find is the bill has not even been filed for 2 solid weeks yet. Maybe we can talk about it enough until it'll be 2 weeks old. But, Senator, this bill was filed something like less than 2 weeks ago on Wednesday.
Days?
Less than 2 weeks
Senator,
ago.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding you, Senator.
Senator, you're sure you're fat?
No, but I'm only telling you from my memory.
Of course, no prolonged line of questioning can exist without Senator Farabee trying to stop it.
Well, just punch SB 1275. And
I thought there was this ill-fated dark star bill that preceded it.
Well, I think there were 2 bills that preceded this one, Senator. But those 2 bills, of course, are not ones we're discussing here today.
Mr. President, raise a point of order as to discussions as to the bills or the procedure. They have nothing to do with the amendment that is before the Senate.
Some 20 minutes after Traeger ends his questioning, Senator Mangden returns with his completed amendment to Meier's amendment. But he isn't allowed to submit it yet, because as long as Meier is filibustering, there is still pending discussion on Meier's amendment. So besides the occasional interruption, Meier continues to read from his law books with a calm delivery. And before I play the next clip of the audio, I want to explain something. It should be obvious by now that in order to provide all these details, I listened to every single tape recording of this filibuster. So I've got a pretty good idea of what kind of accents these good old fellas are using in their speech. I've noticed that whenever a word ends with IAL, like in the word essential, or some variation of it, like in the word confidentiality, there's a small change in how Meier says it. So, with Senator Meier's accent, it might sometimes sound like essential or confidentiality. Not always, but sometimes. And this led to a small misunderstanding on what Meier was reading about.
Has been equated with such concepts as essentially fictitious. Essentially fictitious. Those words import that claims are constitutionally insubstantial only if the prior decisions... Oh no. Oh no. You weren't listening to me.
That's not a germane debate.
Yeah, you weren't listening to me. Wholly insubstantial. Essentially fictitious. Essentially fictitious.
I thought you said sensual.
Oh, so you're not listening.
Alright, well, we're past 3 o'clock, so at some point during the time he spends reading from his books, Meier has already filibustered for 24 hours. Senator Creighton spends a good number of minutes questioning him, and after him, it's the senator from Lubbock, Kent Hance, a man with a distinct talent for droning on and on. But it does come in handy during the filibuster, and it certainly did come in handy when he began a lengthy question, during which, and this is just my conclusion from what I heard in the audio, 2 people are helping Meier make some adjustments to the contraption he had attached to himself. But I won't play the audio. Hance at some point stops talking, and Meier is spared from having to read too much thanks to further questioning from Senators Traeger and Creighton. And when Traeger and another senator start talking about why Common Cause hasn't responded to the issue of government secrecy as a result of Senate Bill 1275, they get really riled up.
Common cause is not here to expound and to have, you remember, when Senator Miller would open up the record, would bring sunlight to the law. That's right. Where are they? I don't know.
Well, let's hope, Senator, I can say this. You two fellows are doing as much lively talking as I've heard in about 2 days, and if y'all keep talking like that, they're probably all going to be here. Well, I have to admit, Senator, I have got quite a few telegrams here of encouragement, things that people around the state saying they thought it ought to be something that ought to have been done.
I'm going to send you a telegram myself, Senator, because I think you're doing a great service.
Thank you, Senator. I'll take yours and I'll thank you for it.
Oh yeah, and if you caught the end of that, you probably heard Creighton say he was going to send Meier a telegram, which he does, and it arrives around 13 minutes later when Meier is reading.
The district court is not going to obey the Court of Civil Appeals, and it's not going to obey the Supreme Court of the state.
Or the Supreme Court of the United States.
It's not even going to obey the big Supreme Court of the United States. Instead, going to come down here and change it. Senator, I got your telegram, I think.
Would you read my telegram, Senator?
Senator, this is a good telegram. It says, "Dear Bill, congratulations on your filibuster. Carry on, Creighton."
There you are.
This telegram definitely helped improve Meier's current state of mind. Roughly around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Mengden returns to warn Meier about a possible attempt to remove him from the floor.
Say, Bill, they told me to tell you do not accept any offer to vote on any of your amendments under any circumstances, because that's how they're going to get you off the floor, at least right now.
I'm not going to get off the floor. I'm going to keep talking.
Okay, well then don't say you want to vote on any.
I don't want to vote on nothing.
Okay, until you're ready to quit.
That's right.
Okay.
Hey, Walter.
Just so you know, this doesn't actually end up being a problem in the future, but it does offer an example of the types of things one has to look out for in a filibuster. And there are cases in other notable filibusters when there is an active effort to stop the filibuster dead in its tracks. After this warning, Mengden discusses the bill with Meier for a bit, asking questions on behalf of his constituents, including one who was apparently waiting on the phone. I assume Mengden went back to the phone once he ended his questioning. This then allowed Senator Hance to start asking Meier questions. And oh boy. I didn't play a clip from him earlier when Meier's contraption was being adjusted, but this line of questioning, this guy, I just don't know what to say. Just listen.
But the question would be on award evaluation, and of course you'd want to evaluate all the awards. And under the Open Records Act, if you evaluate all the awards, you could give an award for first, second, and third place. And after you gave an award for first, second, and third place, then you give an award for whoever came in last. And that would go to the nice guys, because the nice guys are supposed to finish last under the Open Records Act. Also, you've got the executive director, and they make $28,200 in the first year and $29,200 the second year, which would be a great salary for someone that was supposed to coordinate everything for the Open Records Act at Memorial Stadium. Now, under the Open Records Act, you'd have a situation that the press not only would be there, and you could have it at the Memorial Stadium, but you'd have a situation that the entire public would want to be there, and you could go ahead and have a football game. And of course, the football game would have to comply with the Open Records Act, the Industrial Accident Board, and if one of the guys at the game got injured, then he would be able to file a claim. It would be a comp claim for workman's compensation, I guess, under the Open Records Act. And you have a hearings reporter, and the hearings reporter is to report when the hearings are heard, and then the hearings are reported when they're heard. And if they're not heard, they're not reported. If they're not reported, they're not heard. But if they are reported, then they would be reported.
Further along into the evening, it's sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock. And Meier is still continuing to read with a fairly healthy delivery. This is likely thanks to all the questioning he's gone through and the ice water he's been drinking to prevent himself from getting overwhelmed by fatigue. Soon he is once again relieved, this time by Senator Betty Andujar from Fort Worth, also in Tarrant County. She uses the same strategy as other senators, asking long questions and prefacing them by reading documents. But on one occasion, she found herself accidentally reading about the Watergate scandal.
First, maintain no secret personal information systems. That is, no system, the very existence of which is secret. The Watergate affair and its ramifications obviate the need to dwell on this point. I wish I'd skipped that paragraph.
At this time, the Watergate scandal was only a few years old, and considering how politically damaging it was for the Republican Party, it's no wonder that Senator Andujar, who was only one of 3 Republicans in the Senate at the time, probably didn't want to mention it out loud. And following that slip-up, Andujar continues questioning Meier, allowing him to rest his voice. And a short while later, a very interesting possibility is brought up that could allow Senator Meier to rest his legs.
Mr. President, I'd want to retain the floor if I could. I'd be glad to yield to the senator for a question, and the event it would not take me off the floor.
All right.
Well, it wouldn't take you off if you would yield for a point of personal privilege, Senator. In which case you'd be able to sit down.
Well, I got a chair full of books anyway, Senator.
Mr. President,
I recognize Senator Galveston.
I discussed the matter with the senator who's engaged in filibuster, and he would prefer to stay on his feet at this time, and personal privilege speech might well come at a later time.
In the Texas Senate, a point of personal privilege speech is a speech that a senator can give on any topic of their choosing, and according to the rules of the Senate, a senator addressing the Senate may not yield the floor temporarily except by unanimous consent to allow an address by another senator on a point of personal privilege. What this means is that if Andujar was allowed to make her speech, Meier could yield the floor temporarily and still be allowed to continue his filibuster right after her speech ends. And according to the presiding chair, Senator Meier would even be allowed to sit down during the speech. But he declines to take the opportunity, and Senator Babe Schwartz from Galveston mentions that Meier would actually prefer to do that at a later time. This does not end up happening. Meier would never again get the opportunity for someone to make this type of move, and he would remain standing for the rest of the filibuster. After Meier refuses to yield for Andujar's personal privilege speech, she continues her questions, speaking for a very long time. But we must not forget that any senator who dares to provide assistance to Senator Meier needs to pass the therapy test.
And this, in turn, can cause some very peculiar reactions.
State your point of order, please.
It's a dissertation about facts, extrusion of discs and so forth, but it has no relationship to this amendment that is pending before the Senate. And we raise a point of order.
Lady from Tarrant, I thought it was very germane.
Senator, how long have you been listening to this discussion?
I've been here about long enough to hear what he's talking about.
Mr. President.
This discussion has been going on for some time. Senator, how long have you been on the floor?
Oh, about 2 minutes.
Mr. President, I'll be glad to get back to discussion, or I'll yield to the senator for a question, whichever the chair's privilege.
Senator, the
Chair sustains the point of order, and we would ask the senator from Tarrant, Senator Andujar, to frame her remarks in the form of a question that's germane to the issue at this time.
It's roughly around 9 p.m. at this point, but Andujar and Creighton and some other senators are present on the floor. Andujar has been questioning Meier for over an hour and a half, during which Creighton jumps in to make a rather strange point of order on Senator Meier's appearance.
these men come as frequently from white-collar as from blue-collar jobs.
I'd like to suggest, Mr. President, that the Senator from Tarrant's decorum, his makeup, his whatever is not becoming to the demeanor of the Senate, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent for Senator Tarrant to shave.
Mr. President.
Where the chair stands, Senator decorum is perfectly all right.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I thought my personal appearance was fine, too. Thank you.
Excuse me, Senator, you frightened me to death when you referred to the senator from Tarrant having to shave.
I suppose if Meier hasn't had access to a razor in 2 days, it would lead to some facial hair growing out, although I can't really say for sure that it was ever a problem based on the photographs taken of him. Maybe this one shows it, but even still, I think Creighton is just overreacting or just joking. Anyway, 20 minutes after this, the Senate collectively began to spiral into some late-night tomfoolery, and it started when Andujar jokingly asked the chair about the quality of the sound system. When Andujar and the chair discussed the usage of microphones, the other senators present in the chamber start asking about how they can get access to the nicer lavalier microphones, and the whole conversation just turns into something else.
Senator from Harris, Senator from Lubbock, I'm sorry. Senator from Tarrant still has the floor while this exchange is taking place.
I'd like to ask how you obtained one of these lavalier mics.
Mr. President, did you?
Wait just
The chair is ruling that Senator McKnight, the senator from Smith, can obtain a lavalier mic by reaching behind him and taking one from Senator Longoria.
Mr. President, I'd really offer some assistance here. The president, the senator from Tarrant needs some assistance. Wait just a minute, Mr. President. That's a Spanish-speaking microphone. I can't hear you, man. No, I don't speak Spanish. It's bilingual.
Senator Longoria assures the body that it is a bilingual mic, and Senator from Smith is welcome to use that mic, and I'm sure it will be adequate for the members of the Senate. Senator from Jasper.
Senator Williams.
Senator from Harris. Am I hitting it hard enough? Senator from Harris.
President, I'm wondering how they get these mics, bilingual mics. I've never had one.
Well,
I have to say, this was the first time in my life I've ever heard of a bilingual microphone. This conversation goes on for an unnecessary amount of time, but it wraps up soon enough, and Meier goes back to reading from his books. It's 10 p.m., approximately. Meier takes a break from his reading to address the senators in the chamber about his feelings on what the Senate should do going forward.
And I hope the Senate would take a good close look at adopting the amendment that I've laid out, what I've tried to diligently talk about here today to be sure that everybody had an opportunity to get a digested position on what this amendment's all about. I have to admit that I've talked about this more than anything that I've ever talked about all the time I've been in the Senate. As a matter of fact, I've probably spent more time right here on this floor the last 2 days since Monday, about 3 o'clock, than I have in all the time I've been in the Senate up to this time. I think it's evident if you look at my microphone, I'm plumb wore out. But I do feel that this is a very important bill. It's one that's going to be with us for years to come. If it passes, it's just one of those things that happens. I hope it doesn't.
Deep down, Meier knows the bill is going to pass. The best he can hope for is that the Senate will also vote to add on his amendment, but he has some uncertainty about whether that vote will be successful. He takes a few questions from Mengden, who apparently had come back to the chamber with a refreshed appearance, which he had hoped would rejuvenate Meier's spirits. Well, we better hope it did, because just after 10:30 p.m., the Senate is going to make a very important decision. You might have been wondering why so many senators were present on the Senate floor this late at night. Recall what I said a while back when I was talking about the issue of House Bill Day. Rule 13 of the Texas Senate states, "After the morning call has been concluded on calendar Wednesday and calendar Thursday of each week, House joint resolutions and House bills on special order and on third and second readings respectively, and House concurrent resolutions shall be taken up and considered until disposed of." This means that Meier will have to temporarily suspend his filibuster because Senate Bill 1275 cannot be debated on House bill days. Of course, he doesn't mind this because it means the bill can't be debated further until the Senate finishes its business with bills sent over from the House of Representatives. The other senators know this too, including Senator Oscar Mausey from Dallas, the other sponsor of the bill along with Farabee. Let's have a listen at what he is about to do.
Mr. President, I move to suspend all necessary rules, including Rules 13 and 14, so that the Senate can continue to consider Senate Bill 1275.
A few moments later, Meier initially declines to allow the motion, but the consequences are soon clarified.
Under Rule 13, under the notes of rulings, that's ruling in 61 Senate Journal Record at 956, a 1969 opinion, wherein it stated that when a member is discussing a Senate bill on a calendar Monday or a calendar Tuesday, which are considered Senate bill days in the Senate, and 12:01 a.m. Wednesday arrives, which is considered a House bill day in the Senate, and no further discussion may be had on the Senate bill. Mr. President, is that the matter that the chair had reference to in terms of a point of order?
That is correct, Senator.
Then, Mr. President, I do not decline to yield, and if I understand that in the event the rules are suspended and the bill is further laid out for discussion, that I'd still retain the floor and in the same posture that I was in at the present time.
That is correct, Senator, if the motion to suspend prevails.
Thank you, Mr. President.
So what's happening is this. In order to prevent Senate Bill 1275 from becoming ineligible for a full day, Mausey motions to suspend Rule 13. Meier is allowing the Senate to vote on the motion because if he continues speaking into Wednesday and the rules are still in effect, he will be penalized and the filibuster is cut off then. If the vote fails, the outcome is the same because Rule 13 is still in place. In order for the rules to be suspended and allow further debate on Senate Bill 1275, a 2/3 majority is required. That is, at least 21 senators must vote in favor. That's why they're here so late at night. They want to suspend Rule 13 so that the bill can still be debated. The issue for Meier is that if the debate continues, it means that once the debate ends, the Senate can begin voting on the amendment and then vote on Senate Bill 1275 itself. So, if Rule 13 is suspended, Meier will be forced to continue his filibuster without a break. The results of the vote came in.
Being 21 ayes and 2 noes, the motion to suspend the rules prevails. Senator from Tarrant.
Now that the filibuster is set to continue, many of the senators in the chamber decide they want to stick around. Some of them take turns asking Meier a few questions, but they quickly spiral into late-night tomfoolery once again. And when Meier tries to get back to reading from his books, the chair even discourages him because he just wants to goof off.
I asked my colleagues to take a look at this amendment that's been laid out that we've been discussing for the last 2 days. No, as a matter of fact, I really would like to while the Senate's here.
That's no fun. Let's do this some more. Come on.
A few minutes later, it starts to annoy Senator Aiken from Lamar County, who requests that the smallest semblance of order be restored to the Senate.
Senator from Lamar.
Levity's all right up to a point, but some of us that have been up here for 2 nights, some of us all night, some of us part of the night, getting pretty tired of this. I don't like this violating all rules in the book, all the cheering and whatnot. I ask the chair if he will to enforce the rules.
Strict enforcement is called for.
The Senate carries on in a straightforward fashion. And during the time Senator Gene Jones of Harris County spends questioning Senator Meier, the clock, once again, strikes midnight. And we conclude the events of Tuesday, May 3rd, 1977. It's the middle of the night. Many of the senators who were present earlier for the vote to suspend the rules have left. Farabee is, of course, still behind him. The chair is lucky enough to be presiding over the Senate in the early hours, and Meier's wife is also present in the chamber. Just over an hour past midnight, Meier whispers to another senator about the future of his filibuster.
Possibly conference committee and these changes.
I'm not going much longer. I'm going to quit about 11 o'clock.
It looks like we're at a point where we can say it's the beginning of the end. Listening to his voice at around 2 a.m., his delivery when he's reading is the softest it has ever been, and you can hear just how tired he is after 36 hours.
Open Records Act states that it shall be liberally construed in favor of the granting of any request for information. The effect of the court's construction in this case seems to me to require judicial review of the bulk of government records prior to their disclosure.
As if Meier wasn't already exhausted enough, shortly after his glass is filled up with ice water, it falls over and spills all over his desk.
And both employer and employee must submit data to the board. Oh, beautiful. Tati, you made me do that. You didn't really else, except I was shuffling around here to pick up some stuff. No, as a matter of fact, I've been saving about 5 or 6 cases here that I've been wanting to read till you got in the chair. They're all criminal law cases in the Supreme Court, and I'm going to give you a quiz. Yeah. He just brought me a fresh glass of water, and I was sorry.
Another hour later, Meier whispers to someone about feeling lightheaded. They offer to give Meier some Tylenol, but he refuses. They also ask if Meier feels nauseous at all, but Meier insists that besides feeling a bit lightheaded, he's fine. I mentioned earlier that Meier's wife was in the chamber. Well, it seems to me that his children might have also been there to watch him speak. I'm sure that Meier appreciated their presence, but he also repeatedly told them to go sleep in his office. There's no need for more than one member of the Meier family to be sleep deprived. My time-telling method is severely limited, but I believe that around 5 a.m., Senator Hance is presiding in the chair, and under his guidance, Meier will most certainly fall asleep, because whenever he's not having to read from his books, Hance is droning on, and as the chair, he has that privilege. It's like he's doing his own filibuster in the middle of another one. Anyway, the filibuster is showing signs of wrapping up, as Meier at one point tells the Sergeant-at-Arms that he can start taking some of the books back since he's done reading them. In another effort to boost Meier's morale, some flowers have been placed on his desk, presumably by his wife. Sometime between 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning, it appears that members of the press are making their way into the Senate chamber in order to capture what may very well be the final hours of the filibuster. And every time a new reporter entered, Hans would announce their presence and invite everyone in the chamber to applaud.
Gather such additional information as may be necessary to that task. Mr. President, I'll be glad to yield if you don't take me off the floor.
Another member of the press is now here, and I'd like to have a round of applause.
Thank you.
Sometime past 7 o'clock, Meier continues to read from his books. His delivery is just fine. I just wanted to play this clip because here he's complaining about the language used by the case opinion.
To argue that biomedical researchers are really a mean-spirited lot who pursue self-interest as ruthlessly as the Barbary pirates did in their own chosen field. This got to be the worst opinion I've tried to read yet.
Several minutes later, Farabee goes over to Meier and they have a quiet conversation about his physical condition. Keep in mind, as the present sponsor of the bill, Farabee is probably the one who has spent the most amount of time on the floor of the Senate while Meier was doing his filibuster.
I just got all the water out of me, apparently. So I filled it up and I walked.
That's only damage you could do to yourself.
I don't know. I never have any kidney problems. I always just I can piss like it. But I hadn't been drinking anything. I've been just sipping on that water. Only liquid I've gotten is eating those lemons.
You're not weak.
I'm stiff as a board. I don't feel weak. But when I start moving, I really feel funny.
As the hour moves on to 8 o'clock, the sun begins to rise, and apparently, the senator who is supposed to replace Hans as the chair is not here, and he makes sure to let everyone know.
Finally determined in the state courts. In
Would
the first
Senator yield for a
category,
question? Would Senator yield?
Mr. President, I'll yield if it doesn't take me off the floor.
It won't take you off the floor. I've got a little list here of presiding officers, and it has Hans, which is me. And it says that my duty is over at 8 o'clock, and it's 8 minutes after 8. Can you advise the chair who the diligent individual is that's supposed to relieve me?
Mr. President, I'll tell you, I really hadn't been keeping up with my babysitters.
9 minutes later, they still haven't found a replacement. And Hans is encouraging Meier that he should try to continue to filibuster until Friday.
Now, I do presume, Senator, that you will still be here this Friday so that you can go for the world record and international record, and not just the record in Texas.
Mr. President, I'm unadvised about records, but I don't think I'm going to be here Friday.
Well, Confucius broke the world record in China back in 1873, and at the end of his filibuster, he said, "too long," and that was the end of his filibuster, and so you might keep that in mind if you're going for the international.
I know exactly how it feels, Mr. President.
I'm pretty confident when I say Senator Hans just made that up. Meier continues reading from whatever he's got left at his desk until just before 9 o'clock, when he yields to Farabee for questions, bringing the whole filibuster full circle. The two of them discuss the issues related to the bill, like workmen's compensation and confidentiality, but Farabee also congratulates Meier for enduring for so long, and I think the exchange here sums up the accomplishment pretty well.
There are certain rules of the filibuster. In the federal Congress, you can stand up and read a phone book or an encyclopedia or anything else that's irrelevant. But in fact, in our procedure, you do have to maintain some relevance to the issue.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, it's a narrowed issue by virtue of the amendment that's pending. You're familiar with that.
That's exactly right. I'm very familiar with that, Senator.
And I would make the observation that in this period of time, that you have maintained a relevance to those things. I sometimes have raised points of order as to some of our colleagues that have had lengthy questions where I felt that they did go afield. But in each of your responses and in all of the time that you have spent here, in many instances without anyone asking questions, that you have held it narrowly to the issue that is before that. And of course, that's a part of the rules, isn't it?
It is. As a matter of fact, if That germaneness rule is pretty about as tight as any rule I think I've ever tried to operate under. Courthouse or anywhere else, Senator.
Of course, and I think the public has different concepts of filibuster and of persons that are in the legislative process, not those that just directly engage in filibuster. But it's rules like the germaneness rule that make this more than some kind of a physical exercise. Don't you agree?
Well, Senator, it is more than that, but it also is one hell of a physical exercise.
During that clip, you might have heard a few camera clicks, and that combined with the discussion about the filibuster itself, as well as Meier's previously stated intention of ending his speech at around 10:30, suggests that the Senate is now simply trying to kill time before it all comes to an end. Meier knows it, the Senate knows it, and the press knows it. At 9:54 a.m., Meier has been filibustering for 42 hours and 34 minutes, breaking the record set by Senator Mike McCool from Dallas County back in 1972.
Will the senator from Tarrant yield to the chair for an announcement?
Mr. Chairman, I would if it won't take me off the floor. I'd still like to go a little longer.
The chair would like to announce that the time is now 9:54, and with the time being 9:54, that Senator Meier has broken the world record for filibuster, as recorded in the Guinness Book of World Records. Previous.
Lieutenant Governor Hobby mentions Mike McCool's record, and he also brings up the fact that the record held by Senator McCool was itself an improvement on the record of 29 hours and 22 minutes held by Don Kennard, the very same senator who Bill Meier had replaced when he took office in 1973. So with the record already achieved, Meier resets his goalpost to 10:20 a.m. so that his filibuster can be a nice whole number of 43 hours. So in the final 20 or so minutes which Meier still has available, he gives some final closing remarks on the amendment and the bill. After that, he fulfills the promise he made to Senator Farabee during their debate on Monday afternoon, when he said he'd provide the list of names of the companies that made up the industrial foundation of the South.
Whenever we started this debate, the senator from Wichita said to me, the people that you're talking about in this lawsuit are some bunch of corporations. Well, they are. He said, who are these people? They're secret. They don't want to tell anybody who they are. Well, I've got a complete list of the people that he's talking about, or that I've been talking about involved in this lawsuit known as the Industrial Foundation of the South. And I'd kind of just like to let you know some of the names on here that are people from Texas, because I think you, my colleagues in the Senate, ought to know about that. I'm going to read the Texas one.
He then goes on to read the list of the Texan companies. Meier then yields for one last time for questions from Senator Mengden and then from Senator Traeger, who carries Meier to the end of his filibuster at 10:20 a.m. I'll play for you the final minute that Meier spends holding the floor and the ovation he received from the chamber.
Well, Senator, all I want to do is be sure all the people know about this particular bill, know about how these things have been discussed in the legislature, and then we'll let the legislative process take its course.
That's what your amendment does.
Yes, sir.
Open things up.
That's exactly right.
And keep the records open, the Open Records Act.
That's right.
So a vote against your amendment would be a vote against open records, would it not?
It sure would, Senator. There's no question that's what to be the result.
Senator, you shouldn't have any trouble at all because this is on record for reform, on record for open records, for sunshine, all the good things that we've heard about in the last few seconds. And I'm certain, Senator, that after you clarify and bring out this point, that your amendment will be probably accepted by the Army.
Senator, I thank you very much. Mr. President, I'd like to close on the amendment at the proper time.
Flashlight and belt. Okay.
Well, we can do better than that.
You good, Bill?
Oh, I'm gonna do. Oh, that's all I'm gonna do.
Good job.
That's it, Bill. I'm not gonna do that. No, the cover's later. Don't either of them.
I want to at least explain.
Following amendment to the amendment.
That's it. Just like that, it's over. Immediately afterwards, the Senate continues like nothing ever happened to continue the process of passing Senate Bill 1275. Before that happens, though, Senator Farabee submits a substitute for Meier's amendment that included more exceptions and covered the issue of fraudulent insurance claims. It passes with 24 votes in favor. Shortly thereafter, a vote to engross Senate Bill 1275 passes with 23 votes in favor, and after a few parliamentary hiccups, the vote is taken on the final passage of Senate Bill 1275. 23 in favor, 7 opposed, and 1 absence. On May 28th, Senate Bill 1275 would pass the vote in the House of Representatives, with 90 voting in favor, 53 opposed, and 7 absent. 1 month later, it was signed by Governor Dolph Briscoe and became law. But that was the future. Right after the filibuster ended, Bill Meier held a press conference in which he told the press that if he were to go back in time on Monday afternoon, he would still do the filibuster all over again. He also expressed how tired he was, and that all he wanted to do was go home and take a bath. His eyes were bloodshot, and he walked with a slight limp, but besides that, he still looked to be in decent condition. When Meier finally did get back home, he took his bath, ate a big steak, went to bed, and stayed in bed for 20 hours. On the surface, it may seem as though Senator Meier's filibuster was a wasted effort. After all, the bill ultimately became law. But the fact that the bill was going to pass anyway is partly what motivated the filibuster in the first place. Filibusters in general are often used by politicians as a last resort when no other options remain. For example, Strom Thurmond's 24-hour filibuster in the United States Senate was against the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which passed both houses of Congress with a convincing majority before being signed into law by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Even as recently as 2021, you have cases in the Texas Senate, like that of Carol Alvarado, a Democrat from Houston, who filibustered for 15 hours to delay a bill she believed would unfairly restrict voting options. The bill was going to pass due to the Republican majority, so her filibuster merely served to obstruct it for as long as possible. However, filibusters can sometimes be used to kill a bill. This has happened numerous times when a bill is being considered just before a legislative deadline, and all that needs to be done is to push for a little longer so that the bill becomes ineligible. In other cases, a bill can be filibustered so much that the legislature just stops considering it altogether in order to continue functioning normally. This actually happened in 1970 when the U.S. Senate was considering an amendment to the Constitution to abolish the Electoral College and reform the voting system for presidential elections. A coalition of senators who opposed the amendment formed and collectively filibustered the bill, delaying action for nearly all of September. After the proposed amendment was set aside, it would never be considered again for the rest of the session. In any case, the fascination with filibusters doesn't come from whether or not they succeeded. It comes from the duration, which brings me to my next point, the unnecessary world record. Bill Meier's 43-hour speech is the longest continuous delay by a single senator, and it's a remarkable showcase of human endurance motivated entirely by political conviction. Since the record was broken in 1977, no American legislature, that we know of, has come close to replicating what Meier was able to accomplish. As a result, Meier has become somewhat of a legend in the world of filibustering. Every time that another filibuster gets attention, Texas media is quick to remind people that however long they spoke for still pales in comparison to the great talkathon of 1977. But as we saw with the amendment to get rid of the Electoral College, collective filibusters can successfully delay an action for weeks. And why is it that Strom Thurmond's record in the US Senate gets so much attention when there are multiple filibusters in the Texas Senate that lasted longer? Truthfully, I believe that comparing filibusters to each other doesn't really work. The United States Senate has a set of rules which differ from that of the Texas Senate, which is also different from every other state legislature in the country. And forget the United States, filibusters happen across the globe, and those are subject to whatever rule set is used in that country. You could spend all day arguing over the specifics of a filibuster, that the rules for eating and drinking should be more strictly enforced, that a single violation should be enough to end it, that a filibuster doesn't really count if so much of it was spent being relieved by another senator asking questions. You could say anything. It really just depends on what is allowed by the moderators. One notable similarity between Bill Meier and Strom Thurmond's filibuster was that they were actually both allowed to leave the Senate floor for a single trip to the bathroom. So straight away the rules weren't always followed. Ultimately, the filibuster will always be a complicated issue. We may not always notice or even care about the finer details until they actually have an impact on the filibuster itself or on the outcome of the legislative process. It's easy to feel bitter when a filibuster successfully kills legislation that you support, but it's equally as satisfying to rally behind a senator when they use the filibuster to fight back against something you oppose. And in those moments, one may find themselves advocating for the filibuster to either be preserved or outright banned. If I were to throw in my own 2 cents, I'd place myself on the side of preserving it. Filibusters embody the principle that in a functioning democracy, every voice has a right to be heard, even if they only serve to delay the inevitable. And by shining a spotlight on issues that might otherwise pass unnoticed, they have a unique way of engaging citizens and sparking the public's hidden passion for the policymaking process, reminding us that government is never as dull or distant as it sometimes feels. The filibuster is a reminder that the most important battles aren't necessarily the ones we win, but the ones we choose to fight and continue to fight.
I don't yield to you right now, Senator. As a matter of fact, what has happened in 1973 was the legislature passed a bill that says the records of state government are open. A request was filed with this Industrial Accident Board to look at records concerning workmen's compensation claims. The board, under the Act, refused to grant that request, and instead requested an Attorney General's opinion. Are our records open or not? Or are they closed? The Attorney General, after some period of time, ruled that those records were in fact open records and that the board should give the records to the party requesting. But that wasn't enough for the Industrial Accident Board. It still refused. And what happened? As a part of what's said in the Act, the party seeking the records